The true test of friendship is not in good times but bad. Similarly, the true test of leadership is not good times but bad. Both friendship and leadership get tested in tough situations. And what could be a tougher situation than the VUCA world that we are facing around us right now? But just like a ship needs an anchor and a lighthouse to guide it to safety, a leader's authentic story can play a powerful role of an anchor and sometimes also that of a lighthouse and guide the crew and the ship and all the passengers back to safety, back to harbor. So, what are the three principles or the three pillars that leaders can use to build the story in a crisis situation? That's what I'd like to talk about in the video today. Number one, real talk. Number two, reassurance. And number three, reimagine and rebuild. What do I mean by each of this? Let me get into each one slowly. First, real talk. In any organization, there are two kinds of communication: formal communication and informal communication. A lot gets achieved in the informal communication, which tends to be 3 to 4 times more than the amount of formal communication in an organization. When we go to the lunch room and sit in a canteen, a lot of work gets achieved there as well through informal communication. When people take a smoke break and go out, or when people go to the coffee vending machine, through the informal communication that happens there, a lot gets achieved. But the first calamity when there is social distancing, the first calamity when there is movement control order, is the amount of informal communication. And when communication reduces, there is fear, there is mistrust, there is anxiety, and there is concern in the organization. So the first thing leaders need to do is step up the amount of communication that they are having. Now, what kind of communication? That brings me to the first part of this: real talk. Remember, if you hide the bad news, people are going to get to know about it anyhow. And that will create a lack of credibility and a lack of trust amongst the leadership. So don't hide the bad news. Don't protect your people from the bad news. By sharing it with them, you are going to only encourage them to participate in the solutioning. So invite them to join the solutioning by sharing with them the bad news. They are going to get to know it anyhow. But how to do it? Here's my suggestion: start with the macro and look at the macro picture and share what's happening at a global level. Then come down and narrow down from there and say at the industry level what is happening. And finally, narrow it down further and write down the three implications of the situation and crisis on your company. Let me say this again. That's the first pillar. Write down the three implications of the situation or the crisis on your company. That's the first pillar of communication. Go out there and share it. It will only create authenticity, trust, and credibility. Now, I'd like to talk about the second pillar. And the second pillar is reassurance. Now that you've given them the bad news, you also have the difficult task of reassuring them. How does one go about and reassure people when there is crisis all around and one doesn't himself or herself know all the answers? Well, leaders are not supposed to be Google or Wikipedia to have all the answers. It's okay not to have all the answers, but do share the answers as they exist today. But reassure people. How do we reassure people? Look at history. This is not the first time a crisis has happened in the world. Coca-Cola is more than 100 years old. Colgate is almost 200 years old. And Barclays is almost 300 years old. These organizations have seen World War, they have seen the Great Depression, they have seen amongst them the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the Iran-Iraq War, the disintegration of Soviet Union. They have seen malaria and chickenpox. They have seen COVID and SARS and Ebola. They have seen independence of India, and they have survived. So if you want to tell a reassuring story, look at your own organization's history. look at its past and say, when was the time the organization faced its biggest crisis and how did it bounce back? And go and tell that story. Remind the people that your organization has the resilience to bounce back from any kind of failure. Let me give you a couple of examples. Just a couple of years ago, every time you boarded a plane, everyone in the world heard an announcement made by a flight attendant. And the flight attendant was saying, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a Samsung Galaxy S7 Note, you know what I'm talking about. The biggest PR disaster for Samsung, where every passenger on an airline is being told, this is a terrible phone. What does Samsung do? Samsung goes back and builds the best possible phone in the history of the company so far. And Samsung Galaxy 8, after this disaster, delivers the highest profit margins and the highest revenue for the company. In India, just a couple of years ago, Nestle was reeling under a crisis that it had never faced in its 150 years history. The crisis on Maggi. The biggest trust deficit that the company could have faced. But it was not just a trust deficit. 7 factories were shut, 7,000 jobs were at stake. And what does the company do? Go back and win back the trust of the customers. Apple, just 20 years ago, the company with the highest cash reserves, Apple, was losing $1 billion per year. Whether it is Marvel or Lego or Microsoft, all of these companies have bounced back. I wouldn't be surprised if the leaders of these organizations are sitting with their teams and reminding them right now that if the company could face that crisis and bounce back, then they could ride over this one too. So as a leader, what you need to think about is the biggest calamity or crisis your organization has faced, and remind people that you have bounced back from there. That reassures them. If you can't think of that, think of the biggest calamity you have faced as a leader in your life and tell them the story of how you bounced back. But there's more that you need to do in order to reassure, and that is about leading with actions. Imagine you have a company with 500 employees and your headquarters is telling you that you need to cut 50 jobs to save costs. These are the conversations that people are having around us. Now you have the option of cutting those 50 costs and letting those people go, but the remaining 450 will worry for their jobs and lose faith and lose trust, and they will be the first ones to jump the ship once the sea calms down. So what should you do? Should you lose those 50 people and sack them? There's an alternate option. The 5 leaders of the company can take a 10% pay cut and save all those jobs. But remember, when the crisis is over and you have to rebuild this house, people will have to work 18 hours and 24 hours. They will have to push the envelope and go and give you more than 100%. And it is these very people who will stand by you. And the other 50 people will remember this and they will stand by you and rebuild the house. So reassure people with a bouncing back story and lead with reassuring actions. And here's the third pillar that you can use to build the leadership story in a crisis situation. Reimagine and rebuild. After you have shared the real talk with people and after you have reassured them, you also need to reimagine the company's future from where you are today. People need to see the light at the end of the tunnel. People in a ship need to see that island. They need to see that lighthouse that gives them hope and allows them to row with renewed vigor. So what is that light that you can show them? No matter how bad things are, there will be some things that are working, and then there are some pivots that need to be made in order to emerge stronger. Think about those strategic pivots and rebuild the story. For that, you need to look at the green shoots and the silver lining that is available. Let me give you an example. If you are a computer company that manufactures computer, Right now, there's crisis because parts are not coming from China, because you can't go and service the broken computers or damaged computers. But what you need to think about is what are the green shoots? And here are 2 or 3 possible green shoots for a computer company. Green shoot number 1: when the situation gets over, there will be a huge market for work from home. There would be another market for learn for home or learn from home. And the third market perhaps would be the school market. So show them that light at the end of the tunnel and build hope and resilience in the system and start rebuilding and revitalizing your organization towards that direction. In every organization, there would be some silver lining. Like the poet Leonard Cohen said, there's a crack, there's a crack, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Look for that crack and help people reimagine the company's future and reallocate resources accordingly. Remember, a leader in times of crisis also needs to be the cheerleader. So use these principles and build the story. Real talk, reassure, and reimagine and rebuild. And when you go rebuild, celebrate the small successes. Celebrate early wins so that it revitalizes and re-energizes the system. In the end, remember, tell an authentic story because nothing is more powerful than authenticity and hope.